Hey guys, tonight we are stepping into the cold, soggy world of Elizabethan England, where you are not a lord, a knight, or even a tradesman. You are a peasant. Your shoes, if you have them, are stuffed with straw. Your home leaks. Your belly growls like a cornered badger. And every morning you wake up wondering what scraps you might scavenge just to see the next sunset. Welcome to the bottom of the food chain, literally. You trudge through misty fields, feet sinking into sludge, as crows circle above like they know something you do not. It is not plague season, yet, but something just as lethal stalks the countryside. Hunger, and not the missed lunch type either. This is the kind of gnawing starvation that makes you eye tree bark a little differently. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop a comment telling me where you are listening from and what time it is over there. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You stand at the edge of your muddy little village, watching the sky. It is always the sky. Will it rain? Will it freeze? Too much of either, and you are done for. Because here, in the late 1500s, you live or die by the harvest, and the harvest has been cranky lately. The weather patterns shift like a moody teenager. One year it rains nonstop. The next, the sun forgets how to rise. The result? Rotting wheat, blighted oats, and a pantry that echoes. Your diet depends on what your landlord allows, what your garden can grow, and what you can scrounge without catching a beating. And while Queen Elizabeth might be lounging under golden canopies, you are scraping the mold off yesterday's pottage and pretending it adds flavor. Starvation is not just a possibility. It is a guest in every home, uninvited but ever present. When winter bites, food stores dwindle. The bread grows thinner, the soup stretches farther, and the meat, well, you will not see meat until Michaelmas, and even then, only if you are lucky or especially sneaky. You are part of a system designed to keep you where you are. Rents are high, wages are low, and the land you farm does not belong to you. You are a tenant, a laborer, a serf in all but name. And yet, you survive. Barely. You make it work. Sort of. You patch holes with hope and feed your children on stories when there is no bread. Historians still argue whether the average Elizabethan peasant consumed enough calories to sustain basic health. Some believe you did, just barely, thanks to a shocking number of turnips. Others argue that widespread malnutrition was the norm, hidden under layers of peasant stoicism and regional foraging. Either way, your stomach is never quite full, and neither is your neighbor's. You learn to live with hunger like it is a cranky relative. You distract it with thin ale and tough bread. You chew slowly. You add more water to the pot. You joke, darkly, about how the rats seem fatter than your children. Still, you adapt. When the wheat fails, you try barley. When the barley dies, you dig up roots and boil them into something that might pass for stew. And when even that fails, you look to the woods, the hedgerows, the riverbanks. There is food out there if you know what to look for. Nettles, mushrooms, wild garlic, your ancestors' survival knowledge. becomes your everyday cookbook. And then there are the times when you just go without. A skipped dinner here, a fast day there. The church says it is good for the soul. You are not so sure about that, but it is certainly cheaper. You huddle in your cottage, walls plastered with clay and hope, fire sputtering low. The wind whistles through the cracks, and your child curls into you, whimpering from the ache of an empty belly. You whisper a lullaby and stroke their hair, pretending that help is coming. But you know better. No one is coming. Not the Lord, not the priest, and certainly not the queen. And yet, you are not entirely without power. Communities stick together. If you have 2 onions and your neighbor has a cabbage, you might both get soup. When the baker's flour is thin, he throws in mashed beans. Is it tasty? Absolutely not. But it will keep you upright another day. One quirky detail most people miss. Elizabethan peasants sometimes mixed ground-up tree bark into their bread when flour was scarce. Yep, actual bark. Pine and elm were popular. Not for flavor, obviously, but because fiber is filling when you are desperate. Picture that next time you complain about gluten-free loaves. And still, you laugh. Not often, not easily, but you do. Because laughter is lighter than hunger. You tell stories about the man who tried to eat a boot again. You tease your sister about burning the soup again. You share dreams of next year's harvest, because dreaming is free, and no one can tax that. This is survival, not as a noble struggle, but as a stubborn refusal to quit. You are tired, hungry, and ignored by history, but you persist. And that persistence, that sheer, grim determination, that is how you beat starvation, one bitter mouthful at a time. Tomorrow, maybe you will find something more filling. Maybe the weather will shift. Maybe someone will share. But tonight, you close your eyes to the sound of your own stomach and hope for one more day. You wake up to frost coating the inside of your cottage walls. It is still dark, because in winter, the sun is lazy, but your stomach has been wide awake for hours. Time for breakfast. And by breakfast, of course, you mean a slice of bread so hard it might qualify as a self-defense weapon. But here is the thing. Even bread, your most basic daily staple, is not a sure thing. Because flour, dear listener, is not always flour. You reach for the loaf your neighbor traded you for a spoonful of salted turnip mash. It smells faintly sour and alarmingly earthy. That is not some trendy whole grain blend. It is bark, ground tree bark, sometimes mixed with crushed acorns, pea flour, or even powdered roots. You chew slowly, not just because it is tough, but because you are trying to figure out if that crunch is a rock, a beetle, or both. When grain stores ran low, and they often did, you got creative, or rather, desperate. And not everyone was honest about their flour mix. Unscrupulous millers added chalk, ground bones, or worse. The poorer the bread, the more likely it was to poison you. Some of it caused cramps, hallucinations, or skin lesions. You thought bread was the safe option? Not in Elizabethan England. One especially nasty guest that occasionally snuck into your diet? Ergot. It is a fungus that grows on rye when the weather is just wrong enough, which is often. and it causes something charmingly referred to as T. Anthony's fire. You might get burning limbs, wild convulsions, or terrifying visions. And there's no which involved. It is your bread, your literal daily bread. Historians still argue whether some of the so-called bewitched peasants were simply ergot victims having a fungal freakout. But you do not care about historical debate right now. You're just hungry. And bread is everything. In a good year, wheat bread is for the rich, barley bread is for people with connections, and oat bread is for folks like you. In a bad year, you are back to bark loaf. You slice it carefully with a knife that once belonged to your grandfather, because wasting bread is not just wasteful, it is disrespectful. Your whole life revolves around making the most out of the least. Your hands are rough from years of grinding grain in a corn stone, a back-breaking chore that turns kernels into flour and your spine into gravel. It takes forever, and if your stone is worn down or chipped, it adds stone dust to the mix. So if your teeth feel extra gritty, that is not your imagination. A light joke around the village goes, if you still have all your teeth by 30, you have not been eating right. It is not actually that funny, but it keeps you from crying. You might flavor your bread with herbs, if you are lucky, wild garlic, maybe a sprig of marjoram. But butter? Save that for Easter. And eggs? You have 3 chickens, and they are all broody. So good luck with that. And still, this grim bread matters, because it keeps you going. It gives you energy to stumble through the fields, to gather firewood, to repair the leaking thatch above your bed. Without it, your body starts to eat itself, so you chew, slowly, carefully, gratefully, even. You glance at the last crumb on the board and consider splitting it with your little sister. She is 8, but her bones look like a sparrow's, and last night she coughed all through supper. You push it toward her and watch her eyes light up. One more mouthful, one more hour of not feeling hollow. Now, here is the quirky part. Sometimes, in times of famine, communities bake symbolic bread loaves, decorated, painted, even shaped into animals, and offered them in church prayers for a better harvest. These were not eaten, mind you. That would be cheating. No, they were offerings, tiny prayers in crusty form. Dear God, please send us rain, but not too much. That kind of thing. The irony? While your spiritual loaf sat on an altar, you were chewing old rye and pretending it had flavor. But faith, like bread, is often easier to swallow when you are desperate. As you step outside with your half-empty stomach, you smell smoke from a neighbor's chimney. You hope they have better bread than you did this morning. Maybe a real wheat loaf, maybe with actual yeast, not the half-fermented wild stuff you tried to raise in a cloth-covered bowl. Bakers in the towns? Different world. Their bread is regulated. Sort of. The size of bread and ale. Yes, that was an actual law. Tried to control prices and weight. But out here in the country, it is every loaf for itself. And you, peasant that you are lucky to have any at all. You remember that one feast last spring where someone brought honey bread. Sweet, golden, soft. You dream about it sometimes, like a memory from another life. It tasted like wealth. Historians often debate whether Elizabethan diets were really that dire. After all, there were years with decent harvests, and some peasants kept bees, or traded for better flour, or managed their gardens cleverly. True, but there were also years when people ate boiled grass. And right now, as your ribs ache and your mouth still tastes like moss and rock, you are pretty sure you are living through one of the latter. But hey, at least you are not eating your shoe yet. That comes later. You head off to find fuel, maybe snare a rabbit, maybe beg for stale crust at the manor. Maybe today is the day someone has extra and remembers you, because hope, like bad bread, takes the edge off. And if not, there is always bark. You pull your threadbare cloak tighter as you shuffle down the frost-slick path, stomach doing its usual empty somersaults. Bread, if you are lucky. But today might be a soup day, which is a generous way to say a boiled, vaguely edible liquid with mystery floaties. You start with water, questionable, yes, but you boiled it twice, and then throw in what you found, a handful of wild sorrel from the edge of the woods, a few snails if they were slow enough to catch, and something that might be a mushroom. You sniff it. It does not smell like death. So, into the pot it goes. Cross your fingers. Soup, for you, is not just food. It is a strategy, a survival tactic. The thin liquid stretches scraps that would never pass as a meal on their own. A single sprig of thyme, a spoonful of oats, half a carrot from last autumn's sad harvest. They all get a second life in your cauldron of hope. You simmer it slow and long, because sometimes waiting feels like seasoning. And when it is ready, you sip it carefully, savoring every hint of real taste. If it is not bitter, that is a win. If it does not make you sick, that is a miracle. Mushrooms are a gamble. Everyone has a story about someone who picked the wrong one and danced themselves into the afterlife. You go by smell, color, how your grandma used to describe it. White under, pink top. Smell like wet wood, not almonds. Almonds, apparently, are the smell of doom. Historians still argue whether Elizabethan foragers had a working folk taxonomy of mushrooms, or just winged it and hoped for the best. You are definitely in the second group. You remember that one spring when your brother picked a mushroom that turned his tongue black. He survived, but never ate anything fungal again. You, however, are braver, or more desperate, one of those. Still, you are not entirely reckless. You stick to things you know, dandelion greens, sorrel, nettles. Boil those long enough, and they are almost tender. Maybe not good, but safe. And if your hands tingle after handling them, that just means the vitamins are working. Probably. Sometimes, the forest offers treasure. A patch of wild onions, garlic mustard, fat-bodied frogs that blink at you like they suspect your intentions. Correctly, you take what you need and leave the rest. It is unspoken law, because you are not the only one combing the hedgerows. Foraging is as social as it is survival. You nod at old Agnes, crouched under the hawthorn, muttering about gooseberries. You trade a handful of chickweed for a few dried crab apples. You share what you found, unless it was mushrooms. Then you play dumb, just in case they were the good kind. You scrape together enough for soup, just, and maybe tomorrow, If luck smiles and your cousin's traps worked, there might be meat, rat, squirrel, or sparrow. No one is fussy. Not now. Not ever. Let us pause for a moment on the word swill. You hear it used as an insult these days. School lunch is swill, or airline coffee is swill. But for you, swill is salvation. It is the stuff you slurp with your eyes closed, because your stomach cannot afford standards. Swill is every vaguely edible thing boiled until it forgets what it used to be, and still, somehow, your body thanks you. A warm belly, even briefly, calms the shivers and soothes the ache. You eat slowly, stretching the moment. You dip a crust into the broth and pretend it is a feast. You joke with your neighbor about becoming gourmet chefs. Tonight's special, nettle consomme with a hint of desperation. Even when food is foul, you dress it with laughter, because that is seasoning too. One fun, little-known fact: in especially bad years, some peasants resorted to eating famine gruel, made from boiled thistles, ground fern roots, and yes, again, tree bark. The texture was somewhere between porridge and wet cardboard, but if you closed your eyes and thought of summer, it went down easier. But there are risks, not just of poisoning, but of stealing. The best foraging spots often lie on land that technically belongs to someone else. You tiptoe into the edge of the Lord's woods, eyes sharp, ears sharper, because if the reef catches you gathering mushrooms or snaring birds, it is not a slap on the wrist, it is fines, lashes, or worse. So you learn to move quietly. You become part squirrel, part shadow. You know which tree hides truffles in spring, which hedge berries ripen early, which mushrooms bloom by moonlight. You pass this knowledge down like treasure, because it is treasure. You also learn the signs, what plants look like food, but are not. Spurge, deadly nightshade, hemlock, one wrong bite, and you are not hungry anymore, ever. And here is something wild. Sometimes you eat clay. No joke. A type called terra sigillata was sold in powdered form in some towns and was believed to be both medicinal and slightly nourishing. Scholars debate whether it actually helped or if it was just old school placebo. Either way, it was better than chewing on hope. You sit back, empty bowl in hand, and let your stomach settle. It is not full, not really, but it is not howling. And that is enough. Your child tugs at your sleeve. You offer the last spoonful without hesitation. They smile. You watch the color creep back into their cheeks and think, we live another day, because soup, swill, and suspect mushrooms are not glamorous, but they are survival. And survival, for you, is everything. Your child sleeps now, curled like a kitten under the hay-stuffed blanket, and you sit by the hearth, coaxing the last whisper of heat from the coals. The air smells like smoke and cabbage, with a dash of damp wool, your usual home perfume. But it is quiet, and in this quiet, you think about tomorrow's hunger, which brings you, once again, to the garden. Calling it that is generous. It is really more of a patch, a stubborn square of earth behind the cottage where you bribe the soil with sweat and prayers. But even the stingiest garden can save your life. You grab your hoe, not the good one, because the blacksmith wants 3 eggs and your soul to fix it, but the one with a split handle and a loose head. You tap the frozen ground, not planting weather, not yet, but you are already planning. Peas go in first. They forgive bed soil and give you green tendrils that remind you spring is not a myth. Then onions, tiny, fierce, and patient. You interplant leeks and maybe carrots if your neighbor lends you seed. And cabbage. Always cabbage. Because it grows in terrible conditions, and when pickled into sauerkraut, it can save you from the dreaded scurvy. You might not know the word scurvy, but you know what happens when your teeth start to wiggle and your gums bleed like they are haunted. Gardening, for you, is less a hobby and more a form of begging. You plead with the dirt, the sky, the sun. You plead with slugs to go eat someone else's turnips. You pray that the cows in the next field do not trample your bean trellis again. You whisper sweet nothings to your lettuce, hoping it will not bolt in a fit of sunny rebellion. And still, half your seedlings vanish. Rabbits, birds, rot, or just bad luck. Historians still argue whether peasant crop failure was mostly weather, pests, or technique. The truth? All 3, plus a 4th, spite. Nature has a grudge, and she does not care about your dinner plans. Here is a quirky detail. In some villages, peasants made tiny scarecrows, not to scare crows, but to charm the gods. These little straw men stood watch over seedlings with twigs for arms and hopeful faces drawn in charcoal. Not practical, but oddly comforting. You made one once. Your child named it Edgar. Edgar now lives under the fence, slowly composting into next year's fertilizer. Speaking of fertilizer, you do not have compost heaps and tidy systems. You have muck, rotting leaves, kitchen slop, chicken droppings, and whatever your pig leaves behind. You dig it into the soil with your bare hands. It smells like defeat and future soup. You plant in rows mostly, or whatever passes for rows when your measuring system is 2 hands and a prayer. You do not overthink spacing, because if every seedling survived, you would faint from joy. But they do not. So you scatter, wait, and hope. Gardening tools? You are looking at them. Your fingers, your back, and your patience. Maybe a spade, if it is not rusted through. Maybe a watering can fashion from a broken ale jug with holes poked in the bottom. In dry spells, you haul water from the village well, sloshing it into buckets that weigh more than your dog. You water at dusk, whispering to the plants like you are tucking in babies. Because honestly you are. And when the first green shoots appear, you cry, just a little. Then you protect them with everything you have, netting made from old linens, prickly twigs, scarecrow Edgar too, whatever it takes. Because those little shoots are dinner, medicine, and next season's hope. The garden gives you things the forest cannot. Predictability, control, spinach when your body screams for iron, garlic when your neighbor coughs blood, radishes that bite your tongue and remind you what fresh tastes like. Your friend once grew parsnips as long as his forearm. He fed his whole family on them for a month. You dream about those parsnips. You even named one of your own Big John before the frost killed it in its sleep. Gardening is not for the faint of heart. Still, when the stars are right and the gods merciful, the harvest can feel like magic. You pull a carrot from the ground, wipe the dirt on your sleeve, and bite into it raw. It is spicy and sweet, and so orange it shocks your tongue. That carrot might be all you eat until evening, and you are fine with that, because it came from your hands, your work, your earth. During late summer, you dry what you can, onions braided and hung above the hearth, herbs tied in bundles, beans shelled and stashed. You dig a hole for root vegetables, line it with straw, and cover it with boards. It is not elegant, but it keeps frost off and hunger out, sort of. And when winter comes knocking, you ration, you barter, you cry over a spoiled pumpkin, you make soup with dried cabbage leaves and pray that the spring comes early. Every bite you saved from your garden is a bite that delays the panic. Funny how something as small as a beet can make you feel like a king. Gardening is not easy. It is back-breaking, toe freezing, and hope burning. But it is yours. A little patch of maybe. A dirt-stained prayer you keep planting every year, even when the last one failed. And when your neighbor asks how your garden is doing, you say what everyone says, better than last year, whether it is true or not, because that is the real trick to surviving hunger, not just scraping meals together, but believing that tomorrow might taste a little better. The hens are arguing again. You can tell by the sharp, squawking complaints echoing from the co-op. Someone probably stole someone else's nesting spot. You sigh, wipe your hands on your apron, and shuffle toward the noise. Chickens, a nightmare covered in feathers, but your best shot at breakfast. You reach the co-op and peer inside. 2 eggs, warm, uncracked. That is a jackpot by your standards. You pocket them gently, whispering bribes to the birds. Keep laying, and I might let you live through winter. They cluck, unconvinced. Poultry might be your only livestock, unless you count the mouse living under the floorboards, who is surprisingly bold and definitely judging your cooking. You dream of a pig, a fat one with a muddy snout and a generous nature. But pigs cost money and scraps, and you rarely have enough of either. So your livestock is humble. Chickens, maybe a duck if one wandered into your yard and never left. Occasionally a goat, though that is a commitment. Goats are clever, rude, and always escaping. Like hairy toddlers with a taste for mischief. Your cousin had one that figured out how to open latches. It was last seen on the church roof, but chickens are manageable. They lay eggs when fed, peck at pests, and fertilize the garden with relentless enthusiasm. Their squawks are your morning bell. Their feathers are stuffing for your pillow. Their bones, someday, will enrich your soup. It is a tough truth. You name them all dinner to keep perspective. Livestock in Elizabethan villages was not always personal. Wealthier peasants shared animals across families, grazing them in common pastures. You sometimes chip in for a community pig, raising it collectively and dividing the meat at slaughter. A pig you only half own is still better than none. They suspect someone's been sneaking more than their share of bacon. Historians still argue whether communal ownership improved fairness or just sparked petty feuds. You have seen both. Last spring, a dispute over a cow's milk nearly led to a duel with turnips as weapons. It was absurd and completely understandable. If you are lucky, you might have a sheep, not for meat. You cannot afford that luxury, but for wool. You shear it in spring, spin the fleece into rough yarn, and trade some for flour or soap. A sheep is a walking sweater and a living bank account. But back to the birds. Eggs are currency. You trade them for ale, candles, and stories. Boiled eggs travel well and last for days, making them a common lunch when you are out gleaning or hauling firewood. Fried eggs? That is celebration food. You eat them fast, hot, and with a piece of yesterday's bread toasted on the coals. Once you had 6 hens laying in harmony. For 3 glorious weeks, you had so many eggs you felt rich. Then the fox came. It took 4 birds in one night and left a mess behind. You wept. Then you rebuilt. You always rebuild. To protect your birds, you patch holes with anything. Woven branches, broken tools, even bits of pottery. The co-op looks ridiculous, like a shack built by drunk goblins. But it works. Mostly. And then, of course, there are the livestock that are not supposed to be yours. The ones you borrow from the Lord's estate quietly, quickly, and usually at dusk. Poaching is illegal. Very illegal. But hunger does not read the law. So you set snares for rabbits on the edge of the woods. You bait them with carrot peelings and hope the gamekeeper is too drunk to patrol tonight. If you catch something, you are careful, cook it at night, bury the bones, deny everything. One time, your brother came home grinning, a pheasant hidden under his coat. You scolded him for the risk, then roasted it with wild garlic, and wept from joy while eating. You are a hypocrite. So is everyone else. A quirky tidbit? Some villagers trained ferrets to flush out rabbits from burrows. You saw it once, tiny little animal commandos wriggling into tunnels, sending terrified rabbits into waiting nets. It was absurd and effective. You wanted a ferret so badly after that. Still do. Ferrets, chickens, goats, pigs, they all mean food, wool, trade, but also status. The more animals you keep alive, the more capable you appear. People trust you more. You get better trades, warmer smiles. Livestock is power in feathers and fur, but it is also noise, mess, and endless chores. Feeding, cleaning, mending fences, chasing strays. Animals get sick. They escape. They die. You lose sleep over coughing goats and limping ducks. Your livestock is not just your livelihood. It is your anxiety on legs. Still, when a hen lays a perfect egg, or a goat nuzzles your hand, or your pig, should you ever get one grunts happily in the mud, you feel it. A flicker of peace. A sense that maybe, just maybe, you are not losing. Your daughter once dressed a chicken in scraps of cloth and called it her baby. You scolded her, then laughed, because deep down, you get it. These animals are family, not in the sweet, modern sense, but in the raw, practical way that means we keep each other alive. So you tend them, cherish them, and sometimes eat them. And when they are gone, you miss them more than you expected. You check your pockets. The eggs are still warm. That is breakfast. That is survival. There is a thin layer of frost on the inside of your window this morning. On the inside. That is your first clue that today will be brutal. Your second clue? The way your breath puffs in little clouds above your straw mattress, and the faint crackle of ice on the water bucket beside the door. Welcome to Winter, Peasant Edition. You throw on your thickest tunic, which is just a summer tunic with more holes and an extra layer of hope. Wool socks, if you have them. A scarf? Luxury. You wrap your shawl twice around your head and step outside. Your boots crunch on frozen mud. The fields are sleeping. Your garden is silent under a blanket of dead leaves and frost. Nothing grows now. Nothing even tries. And that means one thing. Everything you eat must come from what you already have. Winter is when your real test begins. You did your planting. You tended your crops. You butchered and salted what you could. Now, you ration like a shipwrecked sailor in a leaky boat, counting each bean like it owes you rent. You start with root vegetables, carrots, turnips, onions, anything that hides well in the root cellar. That root cellar is not much, a shallow pit lined with wood, covered with hay and hope. You reach into it like a raccoon on a treasure hunt. Your hand lands on a slightly soft beet. You pretend not to notice. Cabbage is your other winter hero. If stored well, it lasts deep into January. If stored poorly, it becomes a smell so intense you begin to question the existence of joy. You make soup, endless soup. Sometimes you add barley or beans. Sometimes just salt and wishful thinking. Bread is another anchor. If you baked enough loaves and dried them into near bricks, you can soak slices into stew. You call this pottage because it sounds fancier than everything I could boil in one pot. You eat it slowly, trying to stretch dinner into an experience. But the bread does not make itself. It takes flour. And if your flour runs out, things get creative. You start grinding acorns, mixing them with dried peas or beans. Adding sawdust is a line you almost cross, but decide against, mostly. Mainstream fact? Many Elizabethan peasants baked maslin bread, a mix of rye and wheat flour, because pure wheat was expensive and not always available. It was dense, dark, and chewy enough to qualify as exercise, but it kept you alive, and alive is the goal. Not comfortable, not full, just upright and breathing. You also preserve what you can. Dried apples strung like garlands above the hearth. Smoked fish, if you live near water and got lucky. Pickled beets, even dried nettles for tea, soup, or desperate chewing. Meat, rare. You salt it heavily and hang it high. One wrong move, and mold gets there first. If you open your meat sack, yes, it is called that, and see green fuzz. You weep a little and move on. No time for grief, only hunger. Speaking of meat, historians still argue whether peasants ate more pork or mutton in winter. Pigs were easier to raise, but sheep gave wool. Some say most meat was scavenged, traded, or stolen. You say, meat is meat, and if it is in your pot, do not ask too many questions. You get desperate, sometimes. Remember that one winter you found yourself licking crumbs out of your apron seam? Or when you made porridge with water, oat dust, and salt, and told the children it was a new recipe? Quirky tidbit. Some villagers believed that putting a coin in the stew pot brought prosperity. You tried it once, broke your tooth. Never again. There are good days, too. Rare, but real. A neighbor shares a duck. Your cousin brings wine-soaked raisins from a wedding feast. You laugh. You remember how to feel full, and you hope it happens again before Lent. And there are holidays. Feast days where the whole village gathers, sings, and shares whatever scraps they have. You bake a pie from dried apples and half regret sharing it, but only half. Community matters more than calories, most days. Winter also means illness. Cold, damp air plus weak bodies equal coughing fits and fever. You brew onion tea, wrap blankets tight, and hope. Maybe you chew a clove of garlic, if you have one left, or honey and vinegar, a strange combo, but one your grandmother swore by. The sick either recover or do not. There is no sugar coating it. The chill takes more than just crops, but you go on, because grief does not cook soup, and there is always the fire. Even a bad fire is better than none. You huddle near it, turning like a spit roast, trying to warm each side evenly. The smoke clings to your clothes, your skin, your soul, but it is heat, and heat is life. Fuel? That is its own battle. You collect sticks in autumn, maybe dry dung if you are low on wood. You make turves, slices of peat stacked and dried like grim little cakes. Not romantic, but they burn. By February, the food is mostly gone. You chew slowly, look thinner in the mirror puddle, and promise to plant earlier next spring. But then the frost begins to retreat. A green shoot peeks up near the fence, and you remember, you made it, somehow. You survived winter. You hear it before you see it. The dull knock of wood on wood, the strained grunt of effort. It is your neighbor, old Thomas, pounding fence posts back into place with the same rhythm he uses to curse the wind. You nod in greeting, heft your own spade, and return to your own patch of chaos. Spring is here, and the fields are calling. The soil is cold, but not frozen. That matters. It means you can finally work it. Your fingers are stiff, your back already sore, and you have not even begun the hard part yet. You squat and dig. The earth is heavy with months of rain and rot. Worms writhe like tiny dancers. You try not to think about how many of them end up in your mouth during the planting season. Accidental protein. Crop rotation is the name of the game. You learned it from your father, who learned it from his. Peas one year, barley the next. Then maybe let it lie fallow if you can afford to skip planting. You probably cannot. Mainstream historical fact: the open field system dominated much of rural England. You shared large fields with the rest of the village. Each family allotted strips of land. You do not own the soil. You borrow it from time and weather. Today, your job is beans. Hardy, reliable, excellent at fixing nitrogen in the soil, though you have no idea what that means. You just know beans come back strong, and they taste like survival. You poke them into furrows with your thumb, whispering tiny encouragements. Grow fast. Do not die. Impress the church elders. Your hoe is worn smooth from use. The handle has a slight curve from all your years of leaning on it. You are fairly certain it knows your secrets. You look up, a boy is chasing a goose across the next field. The goose is winning. You laugh, just for a moment, because spring is not just labor. It is also absurdity. Fringe tidbit. Some villagers believed singing to seeds helped them grow. You have no idea if that works, but you hum anyway. Mostly because it keeps the crows guessing. And oh, the crows. They are your sworn enemies, clever, beady-eyed sky gremlins. You try everything. Scarecrows, which mostly scare you when you forget about them. Shiny bits of metal, angry shouting. Nothing works. The crows always win a little. Still, you keep planting. Potatoes are not around yet, not in England. Not really. But you might try turnips, onions, maybe even some herbs if you feel cheeky. But you are not alone out here. The whole village is in motion, digging, dragging, yelling, sweating. Even the priest has dirt under his fingernails, which is either humbling or horrifying. You trade seeds with neighbors, sometimes out of kindness, often out of desperation. You once gave a jar of dried peas for a handful of leek bulbs. That leek grew crooked but tasted like victory. Historians still argue whether Elizabethan crop yields were enough to sustain the growing population. Some say yes, with effort and luck. Others say no, leading to chronic undernourishment and eventual unrest. You say, yields are less important than weather, rats, and whether the Lord demands double tax that year. Speaking of which, your village's Lord might wander down the lane, casually inspecting his fields. You smile and nod and resist the urge to throw a clump of sod at his embroidered shoes. He has never held a hoe in his life. But politics aside, the land feels like yours. You work it, bleed into it, dream about it. You measure your years by what the fields gave you, or what they didn't. A light joke? You once tried planting your aunt's love potion herbs next to the onions. It made the entire stew taste like heartbreak and regret. Never again. The truth is, planting is hope. You bend over rows of muddy soil, dropping seeds that may never sprout, in weather that may never warm, for mouths that never seem full. But you do it anyway, because maybe this year, the barley will not rot. Maybe the rains will wait. Maybe the Lord will ignore you. Maybe, just maybe, you will have enough to store and enough to trade. That dream keeps your hands moving. As spring progresses, your arms brown and your legs ache. Your skin itches with nettle stings and blisters. You find dirt in places dirt should never be. You develop an intimate relationship with mud, but then one morning, you see the first green shoot, a pale flicker of life, reaching through the earth like it is trying to escape. You kneel beside it, and grin like a child. It worked. You worked. The work is not over, not even close. You will weed, thin, water, protect. You will fend off sheep, birds, slugs, and somehow children. But for today, you let yourself feel it. The quiet satisfaction of planting something and believing it might grow. The sky is still gray. Your hands are still cold, but your soul, a little warmer. Summer smells like manure and sweat, mostly yours. Also cabbage, which is everywhere now, raw, pickled, stewing in pots, and wilting in baskets. You are halfway through the year, and if spring was hope, summer is expectation. Everything you planted is either growing, struggling, or making excuses. You wake earlier now. The light creeps in at 4 or 5, and the birds start screaming around the same time. You rise, scratch your scalp through your coif, and stagger outside like a hungover squirrel. The fields are waiting. First job? Weeding. Endless, thankless, back-breaking weeding. You know your enemies by name: thistle, dock, bindweed, chickweed. You swear they multiply when you are not looking. You mutter curses in Latin, which you do not speak, but it makes you feel powerful. You work with a rhythm. Hoe, pull, flick, sigh. Repeat. Sweat beads on your neck and runs down your back. You wipe your brow on your sleeve and accidentally smear mud into your eye. Classic. Every now and then, you pause to look around. Wheat stalks are standing tall. Barley is swaying like a drunken choir. The beans are climbing. It is working. You are working. You feel a flicker of pride. Then a bee flies up your nose. Mainstream historical fact: most Elizabethan peasants worked 10 to 12 hours a day during peak summer months. Sunup to sundown, minus a short break for food and a gossip session about that one neighbor who never weeds. You know the one. Quirky tidbit. Some believed planting crops during a full moon made them grow faster. You are not sure about the science, but you once danced half naked in moonlight while sowing carrots. They grew sideways, but impressively large. Midday brings a break. You sit in the shade, gnawing bread that could double as building material. Cheese, if you are lucky. Ale, if you are blessed. Water, if you have given up on fun entirely. You share a joke with a passing shepherd, and he gives you a boiled egg. You consider proposing marriage. Afternoons are for maintenance, repairing fences with twine and prayer, propping up fallen beanstalks, shouting at your cousin's goat, who keeps trespassing and chewing everything green. You threaten stew, but you both know it is an empty threat. You also watch the sky. Constantly, clouds mean rain. Too much, and your barley drowns. Too little, and your cabbage withers. You have learned to read cloud shapes like love letters, each one a maybe, a warning, a promise. Historians still argue whether peasant farming in the 1500s was more collaborative or competitive. Some say shared fields meant shared success. Others claim hoarding and suspicion ruled the day. You say it depends on weather, personality, and whether your neighbor returned your spade. Late in the day, the insects come. Flies, gnats, mosquitoes. You slap and wave and curse like a wizard mid-spell. You smear garlic on your skin, not because it helps, but because it makes you feel like you are trying. You harvest the early crops first: lettuce, green onions, peas. The rest you baby like royalty. You talk to your wheat. You whisper to your barley. You gently shake your beans and say, "You are doing amazing, sweetie." And you prep for the storm, for the tax collector, for the goat who cannot take a hint. You dry herbs, gather kindling, tie up the cabbage heads like delicate green infants. You are part gardener, part guard dog. Some evenings, you sneak away, walk to the river, strip to your shift and wade into the cool, dark water. You float on your back and watch the stars wink awake. The ache in your limbs softens, just for a moment. You hear laughter from the village, music, maybe, a fill and some clapping. Someone is hosting a feast, or a wedding, or they just got their hands on a little too much cider. You smile and think about going. Then remember you still smell like compost and call it a night. You trudge home. Your feet leave deep prints in the soft earth. Inside, the house is stuffy, but it beats the bugs. You collapse onto the straw mattress, limbs splayed, heart full. Then you remember the turnips. You forgot to water the turnips. You groan, roll out of bed, and grab your bucket, because summer does not forgive forgetfulness. It rewards vigilance, punishes laziness, and sometimes, just sometimes, it hands you a miracle, like a patch of wild berries behind the compost heap. You eat them under the moonlight, fingers stained, stomach humming, and think, maybe this year will be all right. The sun is lazier now. It rises late and sets with an orange sigh. You feel it in your bones, the shift from sweat to shiver. Autumn is elbowing its way in, and with it comes the great reckoning. Harvest. You do not sleep much. No one does. The village is in a frenzy. Every hand, from toddler to elder, is needed. Even the priest picks apples, albeit while humming hymns a bit too loudly. You start with the grain. Wheat first, then barley. You and your neighbors line up at dawn, scythes in hand, eyes crusted with sleep and dust. You move through the golden stalks with careful fury, slicing, bundling, stacking. Every clean cut is a small relief. Every fallen bundle, a small victory. Your fingers blister quickly, then callous. Your arms burn. Sweat soaks your collar, but you cannot stop. The weather is shifting, and every hour counts. Mainstream historical fact: harvest was make or break for the year. A poor yield meant hunger, disease, or worse. So while nobles threw autumn feasts, peasants performed a high-stakes ballet with scythes and sacks. You carry the bundles to the threshing floor, where you beat the grain with flails. Thump, thump, thump. You raise clouds of dust that coat your skin like flour. Your lungs wheeze a protest. You ignore them. Then comes winnowing, tossing the grain into the breeze to let the wind carry off the chaff. You do it in the open yard, with a rhythm that is almost musical. The good kernels fall back into the basket. The rest drifts away like promises. You want to cry with relief when you see how full your sacks are. It is not perfect, but it is enough, probably. You try not to count, not yet. Fringe tidbit? Some people believe that if you left a bit of grain in the field, the spirits would bless next year's crop. So you always forget a few stalks, just in case. You move on to root vegetables, beets, turnips, carrots. They come out of the ground like forgotten treasure, covered in clumps of earth, twisted into wild shapes. Some look like goblins. You laugh, then eat one raw. Apples follow. You climb the tree with a basket and dreams of cider. You are not supposed to drink much, too risky, but a little now, and then keeps the spirits up. And the apples this year are sweet and fat, like nature's apology for last year's mold. Then the pulses, beans, lentils. You shell them by hand, your nails splitting with every pod. You save the best ones for next year's seed, a future gamble stored in a linen pouch. Your back aches, your knees creak, your fingernails are permanently brown. But when you look at your storage bins, your woven sacks, your clay jars sealed with wax and hope, you feel like a magician. Historians still argue whether Elizabethan peasants stored food communally or individually. Some villages pooled resources, others hoarded. In your case, it is a little of both. You share with those you trust. You stash a secret stash, just in case you cannot. Winter is not just a season. It is a test. Your attic smells like onions and dried thyme. Your floorboards creak under the weight of grain sacks. You hang bundles of herbs and braids of garlic from the rafters like rustic chandeliers. And then you salt everything. Meat, mostly, when you can get it. Fish, if the traveling peddler is kind. You pack them in barrels with salt so thick it crunches like snow. It is expensive, precious, pungent. You get it through trade, bribery, or sheer luck. You smoke, too. You do not have a proper smokehouse, so you hang meat over your hearth. It works, sort of. You just try not to inhale too deeply when the dog wanders in and stares up at it longingly. You patch the roof, caulk the walls with mud, and sew extra layers into your clothes. You tuck firewood under every dry overhang. You fill every jug with water, then some. And still, you worry, because there is always something. Mice in the barley, dampness in the onions, a bad cold, a new baby, a visit from the Lord's men asking questions about your taxes. But you hold on, because the harvest is more than survival. It is proof that you worked, that you planned, that you endured. A light joke? One year, your cousin tried to hide his barley under his bed to avoid taxes. Woke up with it sprouting in his mattress. He swore it was a religious miracle. Some evenings, after the last sack is tied and the last carrot scrubbed, you sit by the fire and let your shoulders drop. You sip weak ale, suck marrow from a bone, and stare at the flames like they owe you something. Outside, the leaves are falling. The sky bruises early. The geese are honking overhead, heading somewhere warmer, smarter. But you stay, because this is your place. This is your harvest. This is your moment to breathe before the snow. The cold creeps in like a quiet thief. slipping through cracks and into your bones. You wake to frost kissing the windows, your breath fogging the dimly lit room. Winter is here, and it is a whole different kind of battle. You dress in layers, rough wool and patched leather, the only armor against the biting chill. Your fingers numb as you light the hearth, the flames sputtering to life like a stubborn pet. Smoke curls upward, filling the room with the scent of pine and hard work. Outside, the fields lie barren and silent, a sleeping giant covered in white. Your stored food is the only thing standing between you and hunger. It smells of dust and salt, a reminder that survival is as much about patience as strength. Mainstream historical fact: Elizabethan peasants relied heavily on preserved foods through winter: pickled vegetables, salted meat, dried grains. Without refrigeration, these humble stores were life insurance against famine. You sit by the fire, peeling dried apples and nibbling on a chunk of cheese that has hardened into something resembling a rock. You wonder if that lump of lard in the corner is still good, or if it has quietly declared its own death. You decide not to find out. Outside, the wind howls like a pack of wolves, rattling shutters and rattling your nerves. You imagine it carries stories of distant battles, of lost loves, of ghosts lingering in the snow. You pull your cloak tighter, half expecting a specter to appear. Fringe tidbit: some believe placing a sprig of holly above the door warded off evil spirits. You have one, slightly drooping, but you are not sure if it helps or just looks festive. Days blend together. You tend the hearth, mend clothes, and patch up holes in your boots with scraps. You trade stories with neighbors who brave the cold for a brief moment of company. You exchange recipes, gossip, and bits of news from the town. You also pray, softly, though not always to the church. Sometimes you speak to the earth, asking it to hold fast until spring, to remember your efforts, to reward your endurance. Historians still argue whether winter in Elizabethan England was harsher than in earlier centuries, or if the Little Ice Age made things particularly brutal. Some say it broke villages. Others claim it forged resilience. You think it mostly broke backs and patience. The nights are long and dark. You lie awake, listening to the crackle of fire and the occasional creak of the house settling. You count your blessings and your worries: the baby's cough, the missing goat, the Lord's new tax demands. You remember last winter when a neighbor's roof collapsed under snow, burying half their belongings. You helped them dig out, hands raw and frozen. They cried, but so did you, in relief and frustration. A light joke? You once tried to make cider last winter by leaving it outside to age. It froze solid. Your dog tried to lick it and slipped on the ice. You decided nature was mocking you and drank the rest quickly. Despite everything, there are moments of unexpected warmth: a shared loaf of bread, a stolen kiss by candlelight, the soft laughter of children building snow forts in the yard. You learn to savor these tiny fires of joy, because winter is not just about surviving the cold. It is about finding light in the dark and waiting for the world to wake up again. The thaw comes quietly, like a secret whisper through the cracks of frozen earth. You notice it in the way the frost retreats from the fields, how the sun lingers a little longer each day, and how the river's surface begins to sparkle instead of crackle. You step outside one morning to find the world dripping with promise. Mud squelches beneath your boots, and the smell of wet earth fills your nose, a mix of rot and rebirth that is oddly comforting. You breathe it in deeply, feeling it stir something inside. Spring is sneaky. One day it is still winter's shadow, biting and gray. The next, buds burst open, birds sing louder, and you find yourself blinking at green shoots you swear were not there yesterday. Mainstream historical fact: the agricultural calendar was rigidly tied to the seasons, plowing in early spring, sowing seeds, and tending young crops. Missing these narrow windows could mean disaster. So peasants moved with the rhythms of nature like dancers in a grand, unpredictable ballet. You're back in the fields, hands rough from winter chores, cracking fresh soil with a wooden plow pulled by a patient ox. The earth is cool, moist, and welcoming. You press seeds into the furrows, whispering hopes for a bountiful crop. Fringe tidbit: some peasants believe that talking to the seeds, telling them stories, or singing lullabies encouraged growth. You once hummed a tune your grandmother made up about a dancing turnip. The turnip did not dance, but it grew unusually large, so you take it as a sign. The village buzzes with energy. Fairs and markets start up again. You trade last year's preserved goods for fresh eggs, and sometimes a piece of cloth to patch your worn clothes. You meet strangers and exchange news, feeling the pulse of the world beyond your fields. You watch the skies, studying clouds for rain and sun, learning to interpret the weather like a secret language. Too much rain will drown your seedlings. Too little will parch them. You adjust, improvising as the season demands. Historians still argue whether Elizabethan peasants had much say in their lives, or if they were entirely at the mercy of landlords and laws. Some say they were powerless serfs. Others point to subtle acts of resistance and negotiation. You like to think it is a little of both. You tend to your animals, chickens scratching in the dirt, pigs rooting for scraps, the stubborn goat that still thinks it owns the place. You feed them, clean them, and sometimes swear at them when they break fences or eat the very crops you just planted. There are moments of joy. A basket of wild strawberries found on a forest walk, a neighbor's daughter bringing you fresh eggs, the first warm day when you shed layers and feel the sun on your skin like a gentle kiss. And yet, you keep an eye on the horizon. You remember last spring's late frost that destroyed half the barley, or the rats that feasted on the stored grain, or the time a strange illness swept through the village. You carry hope, yes, but also caution, because spring is the promise, but not the guarantee. You return to your work, the familiar ache in your muscles, a reminder that the cycle continues. Plant, grow, harvest, survive. And as you settle into the rhythm, you smile at the thought that despite everything, you are part of something larger, a slow turning wheel, a dance as old as time itself. The fields hum with life again, buzzing with bees, croaking with frogs, and rustling with the cautious footsteps of animals emerging from winter's grip. You trudge through damp earth, your boots soaked and caked in mud, watching as the crops inch skyward like green soldiers standing on tiptoe. The long, patient months of waiting are behind you, but the real work has only just begun. Spring means tending, watering, weeding, chasing pests, and praying that the rain does not betray you with a sudden drought or flood. Your days are long, punctuated by the cries of children, the clatter of tools, and the soft murmur of neighbors swapping news and complaints. The village feels alive, a chaotic symphony of life and survival. Mainstream historical fact: by this time, Elizabethan peasants were experts in crop rotation, moving between wheat, barley, and legumes to keep the soil fertile. This system was crucial to avoiding famine and maintaining enough food for their families. You bend low, yanking weeds with stubborn roots that seem to laugh at your efforts. You curse under your breath, knowing that letting just one weed win could mean lost food and lost time. You wipe your brow, grateful for the slight breeze that carries the scent of fresh grass and manure, an odd but familiar perfume. Fringe tidbit: some farmers believed whistling, while working, scared away evil spirits lurking in the fields. You find yourself whistling an off-key tune, mostly to keep yourself sane, but maybe it does help, or maybe it just annoys the dog. You keep a close eye on the insects. Ladybugs are good luck, aphids not so much. You try natural remedies, ashes, crushed eggshells, even the occasional spider as an uninvited ally. You are a reluctant botanist and entomologist rolled into one. Historians still argue whether peasants had significant knowledge of herbal medicine or if they mostly relied on superstition. Some suggest they had surprisingly sophisticated remedies, passed down orally. Others believe their cures were hit or miss magic. You reckon it was a bit of both, depending on who you asked. You also tend to your animals, milking goats, feeding chickens, and chasing the ever sneaky pig who seems to have a talent for escape artistry. You mumble a mild curse and shake your head, secretly impressed. Evenings are for mending. You sew torn clothes by candlelight, patch holes in shoes, and repair tools. Your hands are cracked, your eyes tired, but you take pride in making things last. Waste is a luxury no one can afford. You sneak in moments of joy, a sweet taste of fresh peas, the laughter of children playing in the dirt, a shared song with neighbors gathered by the fire. You steal a few sips of cider when no one's looking, savoring the sharp, fruity burn. Despite the toil, the uncertainty, and the ever-looming threat of bad weather or bad luck, you keep going, because this is life in all its messy, beautiful, exhausting glory. You remind yourself that every weed pulled, every seed planted, every fence mended is a step closer to surviving another year. And that is enough for now. The sun climbs higher, and the days stretch long and warm. You feel it in your skin, a gentle burn, the slow pull of sweat tracing down your back. Summer arrives with a burst of heat and noise, cicadas droning, children chasing butterflies, the distant thrum of church bells. Your crops are growing, stretching toward the sky with a stubborn determination. You spend your days watering, weeding, and fending off anything that threatens your fragile harvest. Rabbits nibbling on young shoots, birds swooping down for an unexpected snack, and that one neighbor's mischievous goat again. Mainstream historical fact: summer was the peak of agricultural labor. The famous hoeing season involved endless work to keep crops healthy. Fallow fields rested, but your patch was alive, demanding your full attention. You wake early to beat the heat, the dew still sparkling on leaves. Your hands are dark with soil and sweat, your clothes damp and heavy. You carry a bucket of water to the garden. The cold liquid, a small relief against the growing warmth. Fringe tidbit: some believed that certain days of the week were unlucky for farming tasks. Tuesdays, for example, were considered cursed by some, so you try to ignore that when the weeds grow faster than you do. You notice the crops' subtle changes, how the barley's heads sway heavy with grain, how the beans curl tighter around their stalks, and how the strawberries blush red under the sun's gaze. It feels almost like magic, this slow transformation from seed to sustenance. Historians still argue whether Elizabethan peasants' farming techniques were more influenced by tradition or experimentation. Some say they stubbornly clung to old ways. Others claim they adapted and innovated more than we realize. We like to think it was a bit of both, practical wisdom mixed with hope. Midday is merciless, so you find shade under a crooked tree, sharing a crust of bread and a piece of cheese with a neighbor. You swap gossip about the new tax collector, the Lord's new horse, or the strange lights seen in the forest at night. You laugh softly, the sound dry, but genuine. You remember that last summer you tried to plant pumpkins in a shady corner and ended up with a vine that wrapped around your fence like a green serpent. You had to wrestle it free with a mix of amusement and frustration. The evenings bring relief. You gather with friends and family, sharing stories by firelight, the stars blinking awake above you like distant lanterns. You trade jokes and plans, weaving a fragile community of warmth and resilience. Even with the sun shining high and the earth bursting with life, you know the hard part is yet to come. The harvest waits just beyond the horizon, and with it, the weight of survival. For now, you drink in the summer days, knowing that every drop of sweat is an investment in the future. Harvest time arrives like a whispered command, urgent and relentless. You rise before dawn, the chill still clinging to the air as you grab your sickle, heart pounding with a mix of dread and determination. This is the moment your year's work will either pay off or betray you. The fields are alive with activity. Neighbors join forces, a communal dance of cutting, bundling, and stacking grain into golden sheaves. The air hums with chatter, laughter, and the scrape of blades against stalks. Mainstream historical fact: harvesting was a communal affair. Neighbors helped each other to speed the work before weather or bandits could ruin the crop. Sometimes this was called a harvest gang, a necessity born from urgency. You sweat under the sun, muscles aching, back bent low to the earth. You hear children playing at the edge of the fields, their laughter a fragile soundtrack to your toil. You bite back a grin, remembering how you used to be one of them before responsibilities squeezed you tight. Fringe tidbit: some harvesters believed that the first cut of the sickle should be made with a silver blade to bring good luck and a bountiful yield. You only have a rusty iron one, but you hum a protective charm your grandmother taught you, just in case. The stacks grow higher, the work exhausting, but oddly satisfying. You count the sheaves like gold coins, each one a promise of bread and survival through the coming months. Historians still argue whether the harshness of Elizabethan laws on land ownership pushed peasants into such tight cooperation or fostered resentment and rebellion. Some say the community bonds were strong, others warn of simmering tensions beneath the surface. You feel both when you see the Lord's men passing through, reminding you who really holds power. As the sun dips lower, you carry the last bundles to the barn, muscles trembling but heart proud. You know that what you have gathered could mean the difference between feast and famine. That night, by candlelight, you sit with family, sharing a thin stew of vegetables and barley. The mood is quiet, thoughtful, as everyone counts their blessings. You remember the time a late frost once destroyed half your harvest, and the village fell into desperate times. You hope this year will be kinder. A light joke? You recall your cousin tripping over a sheaf and tumbling into a haystack, emerging covered in straw like a startled scarecrow. Everyone laughed, including him, once he stopped sputtering. As you settle down, you feel the weight of the season's labor, a mixture of pride, exhaustion, and cautious hope. Because harvest is more than work. It is the heartbeat of survival, and you have just barely caught it. The harvest stored safely. The village breathes a moment of relief, but your work is far from over. You turn to the animals, whose needs grow louder as days shorten and food becomes scarcer. Feeding them means rationing your precious grain and forage carefully. Your mornings begin with the chorus of clucking chickens and bleating goats. You scoop feed from barrels, your hands sticky with crushed oats and bran, the scent earthy and faintly sweet. You check fences and mend holes made by hungry wildlife, seeking an easy meal. Mainstream historical fact: Elizabethan peasants often had to balance feeding their families with feeding their animals, especially livestock crucial for plowing and milk. Starvation among animals could mean the loss of future harvests. You eye the pig, ever the escape artist, grunting indignantly as you lead it back into the pen. Your boots crunch on scattered husks and straw as you move through the yard. It is a daily battle to keep your small menagerie alive through the lean months ahead. Fringe tidbit: some peasants believed that talking gently to their animals improved their health and productivity. You have been caught murmuring soothing nonsense to your goat more than once. Sometimes it even seems to listen. With the sun lower in the sky, you focus on preserving the last fresh produce. You slice root vegetables, pack them in cool cellars lined with straw, and boil fruits down into thick, sticky preserves that promise sweetness in dark days. Historians still argue whether peasants' diets in late Elizabethan England were improving or worsening due to economic pressures and changing agriculture. Some say variety increased. Others warn that poverty forced many into nutritional poverty. You feel it in your bones on hard days. Evenings offer moments of quiet warmth. You sit by the fire, stitching worn clothes or carving small wooden toys for the children. The room glows orange, shadows flickering across faces, tired but hopeful. You tell stories, tales of clever foxes, brave heroes, and mysterious spirits in the woods. The children listen wide-eyed, clutching scraps of bread and bits of cheese. You smile to yourself, knowing that these stories are more than entertainment. They are threads of culture and comfort, woven through generations. A light joke? Your youngest once tried to train the family cat to herd chickens. It ended with feathers flying and a very unamused feline. But your laughter echoed long after. As night deepens, you look out toward the fields sleeping beneath the stars. The cycle continues: rest, survive, prepare. And tomorrow, you will do it all again. The days grow shorter and colder, a slow slide toward winter's embrace. You pull your cloak tighter around your shoulders, feeling the nip of the air that hints at frost. The fields lie bare now, silent except for the crunch of your boots on frozen earth. You focus on repair work, fixing roofs, patching walls, sharpening tools for next year's planting. The labor is quieter, less frantic, but no less necessary. Every nail hammered, every plank replaced, feels like a small victory against the harshness ahead. Mainstream historical fact: winter was a season of both rest and preparation for Elizabethan peasants. While the fields slept, peasants mended tools, spun wool, and planned the next cycle. Their survival depended on this careful balance. You sit by the hearth, spinning thread from wool gathered in warmer months. The rhythmic motion soothes your tired hands and mind. Nearby, the family cat curls up, purring softly as shadows flicker on the walls. Fringe tidbit: some believe that weaving wool while whispering protective charms kept evil spirits at bay during the long winter nights. You hum an old rhyme your grandmother taught you, half out of habit, half out of hope. The village feels slower, quieter. People gather indoors, sharing warmth and stories to ward off the cold and loneliness. You sip weak tea, savoring the brief comfort it brings. Historians still argue how much agency peasants had in managing their winter food supplies. Some claim they relied heavily on stored grains and preserved foods. Others point to the dangers of scarcity and malnutrition during the lean months. You have felt the pinch more than once. Outside, you sometimes spot the distant flash of a hunter's torch, or hear the bark of a dog chasing unseen prey. Winter hunting was essential for supplementing diets, but it came with risks and uncertainty. You keep your eyes open for signs of trouble, disease, theft, or harsher weather than usual. Each winter is a gamble, a test of endurance and community. You recall last year's deep freeze that trapped the river in ice and made travel nearly impossible. Supplies ran low, and spirits dipped dangerously, but you survived, as you have before. A light joke? Your uncle once tried to teach the dog to fetch firewood, but ended up with a pile of sticks scattered around the yard, and a very proud but confused pup. As the night deepens, you settle into your bed of straw and worn blankets, listening to the wind moan softly outside. You remind yourself that winter, harsh as it may be, is just a season. Life waits patiently beneath the snow, and so do you. The harshness of winter is not just in the biting cold, but in the slow gnaw of hunger. Stored food dwindles, and you find yourself rationing scraps, stretching every crumb to last just a little longer. The larder's emptiness echoes your worries. You huddle by the fire, grateful for its warmth, but knowing that outside the world is a frozen wasteland. The air is sharp with frost, and the ground is locked beneath a brittle crust of ice. Mainstream historical fact: starvation was a real and terrifying threat during Elizabethan winters. Crop failures, poor harvests, and economic hardship meant many peasants faced long months of hunger and disease. You recall the villagers' tales of hunger years, times when the food ran so low that people resorted to desperate measures, even eating roots and bark. The memory is grim, but it fuels your resolve. Fringe tidbit: some peasants kept small stores of dried nettles and dandelion leaves, which they boiled into bitter teas to stave off hunger and cleanse their bodies. You grimace just thinking about it, but admit it might have helped. You gather what little wood remains, careful to conserve your fire as long as possible. You share meager meals, thin pottage, stale bread, a little cheese, and savor the moments of human warmth and conversation. Historians still argue whether peasants' reliance on charity from the church or neighbors was widespread or limited. Some suggest strong community support networks. Others point to isolation and neglect. You have seen both. The children's cheeks are pale, but their laughter still rings, a stubborn spark against the cold shadow. You teach them songs and stories to distract them from the gnawing emptiness. A light joke? One evening, your brother tried to lighten the mood by pretending to be a ghost haunting the empty granary. The children screamed, then laughed so hard they forgot their hunger for a moment. You keep faith in the coming spring, even as you feel the weight of the long winter pressing down. You remind yourself that survival is about small victories, finding warmth, keeping spirits alive, sharing what little you have. You close your eyes and listen to the crackle of the fire, the soft murmur of voices, the heartbeat of a family holding on. Because survival is never easy, but it is always worth it. The first tentative signs of spring seep through the frozen ground, a stubborn green shoot breaking the crust, the faint chirp of a returning bird. You feel a flicker of hope, fragile but real, stirring within you. You step outside to breathe the cold, fresh air, tasting the promise of renewal. The village awakens slowly from its long winter sleep, the earth softening under the warming sun. Mainstream historical fact: spring planting was critical for Elizabethan peasants, who depended on timely sowing of seeds to secure the next year's harvest. Delays could mean disaster. You gather your tools, readying your plow and seeds. Your fingers are stiff from the cold, but your heart is eager. Each seed you plant carries the weight of survival, and the hope of better days. Fringe tidbit: some peasants planted by the moon's phases, believing the lunar cycle influenced crop growth. You listen to these old beliefs, more out of tradition than science, but they comfort you nonetheless. The village buzzes with activity. Neighbors exchange seeds and advice. Children scamper with newfound energy, and the smell of damp earth fills the air. You are part of a living, breathing cycle, connected to the land and each other. Historians still argue how much Elizabethan peasants adapted their farming to changing climates and social pressures. Some say they clung to old methods. Others credit them with quiet innovation. You think it depends on the village, the season, and the soul of the farmer. You work alongside your family, planting rows of barley, beans, and peas, feeling the soil crumble between your fingers. The rhythm of the work is soothing, almost meditative, a counterpoint to the harshness you endured. A light joke? Your brother insists that talking to the seeds helps them grow faster, so he whispers jokes to them. You pretend to be skeptical, but catch yourself chuckling. As the day fades, you look out over the furrowed fields, the promise of new life etched in every row. The cycle turns once more, and with it, your resolve, because in the end, survival is about hope, and hope is the seed you plant every day. With spring firmly rooted, you begin to plan beyond mere survival. You consider how to improve your lot, how to protect your family from future hardships, and how to pass on knowledge to the next generation. You gather with your neighbors to discuss communal challenges, repairing the mill, negotiating with the Lord, and sharing resources. The village feels alive with possibility, even as the shadows of past struggles linger. Mainstream historical fact: peasant communities often met in village councils or moots to solve local issues collectively. These gatherings were vital for managing shared resources and resolving disputes. You notice the way the village elders speak with quiet authority, their wisdom earned through years of toil and trial. You listen, learning the subtle art of negotiation and compromise. Fringe tidbit: some villages kept secret traditions, hidden rituals, or folk medicines that outsiders never fully understood. You're curious but cautious about these whispered customs. Historians still argue how much power peasants really wielded in these meetings. Some say they were empowered and respected. Others suggest they were largely symbolic under the watchful eyes of the gentry. You dream of planting an orchard someday, apples, pears, maybe a stubborn plum tree. You imagine the sweetness of fruit fresh from the branch, a luxury beyond mere sustenance. Light joke? You joke with a friend that your orchard will be so famous, even the Lord's horses will sneak over for a snack. As the season turns, you reflect on the resilience that has carried you this far. You have faced hunger, hardship, and harsh weather, yet here you are, still standing, still hoping. You realize survival is more than just enduring. It is about building, dreaming, and finding joy in small victories. Because life, even in the hardest times, is worth living fully, and you intend to live it well. Now the year completes its cycle, and you stand at the threshold of another winter, older and wiser. The seasons have carved their lessons into your skin and soul, but you have endured, grown, and survived. You walk through the village, noting the changes, the repaired roofs, the new faces, the quiet strength that hums beneath everyday life. You greet neighbors with genuine smiles, knowing each carries their own stories of struggle and triumph. Mainstream historical fact: Elizabethan peasants lived precarious lives, but developed deep community bonds that helped them endure the relentless challenges of their world. You sit by the fire with your family, sharing the last warmth of the day. The children are sleepy, the adults thoughtful. You tell stories, retelling the year's journey in laughter and sighs. Fringe tidbit: some believe the cycles of life were mirrored in the stars, that constellations watched over their fates. You glance up at the night sky, tracing familiar patterns and feeling a quiet kinship with the cosmos. Historians still argue how much Elizabethan peasants shaped their own destinies versus how much they were shaped by forces beyond their control. You believe it was a dance, a delicate balance of choice and chance. You breathe in the smoky air, feeling the weight of history settle around you. Survival was never easy, but it was yours. A light joke? You tease your eldest about finally learning to cook something edible, and the room fills with laughter. The night deepens, and you close your eyes, heart full of quiet gratitude. The story of your year is one of resilience, hope, and the unbreakable human spirit. Because no matter the hardship, you carried on. You survived. And that is a story worth telling. The fire's glow softens as the night settles fully around you. Outside, the world is hushed, wrapped in a blanket of darkness and calm. You feel the weight of the day, the year, slowly lifting as your breathing eases into a gentle rhythm. The echoes of hard work and hardship fade, replaced by a quiet warmth that cradles your thoughts. Survival, you realize, was never just about food or shelter. It was about moments like this, finding peace amidst the struggle, the comfort of a shared smile, the strength drawn from simple hope. The long cycle of seasons, the endless turn of sun and rain, reminded you that life moves forward, always offering a chance to begin anew. Your heart slows, and the stories you told earlier drift like soft whispers, carrying you gently toward rest. The shadows on the walls seem less sharp now, the cold outside less biting. You are wrapped in the slow, steady pulse of history's quiet heartbeat. So, as your eyelids grow heavy, know this: the past's hardships were real, but so was the courage that met them. You are connected to those who came before you, who faced the unknown with grit and grace. And that connection is a thread that will never break. Now, let the night enfold you, peaceful and deep. Let your mind wander softly through fields of golden grain, past fires warm with laughter, beneath skies vast and starry. Tomorrow is a new day, a new chance to carry on. Sleep well. The story will be here when you wake.